before we hop into today's video, want to key you guys in on our giveaway that we're doing courtesy of this channel sponsor, Secondhand Geek. We're giving away a brand new Shadow Sun box. Now, all you need to do to get signed up is use my referral code down below in the description. Sign up with Secondhand Geek, completely free. I'll also honor anyone who's already signed up with the referral code is also going to be entered in the giveaway. If you aren't familiar with Secondhand Geek, they're an online marketplace for wargamers just like you and me. They do pretty awesome stuff there. They charge way less than other online marketplaces, so you'll see that reflected on the prices of the models that they're selling. They also sell terrain, stuff from a bunch of different hobbies, so highly recommend checking them out. They also do this really cool thing where part of the proceeds of every transaction goes to local game stores like the ones you and me go to every weekend. So highly recommend checking them out. And without further ado, let's hop right into the video. Yo, what is up everybody? John from Tout Tactics here, bringing you another video. Today we're going to be doing the Auxiliary Cadre unit tier list. So we're going to walk through all the units in the Tau range and how they relate to Auxiliary Cadre. So the way I'm going to be doing this tier list is going to be based on how well these units both receive the buffs from the detachment, so extra AP when Kroot or Vespid are nearby, or that 18-inch lone op if Kroot or Vespid are wholly within 6 of Tau units, and then also the strats, so namely the +2 strength at AP, auto advance 6, interlocking maneuvers, which is make a normal move at the end of the fight phase, whether that's your opponent's fight phase or your fight phase. So if you're a newer Tau player who's interested in learning more about Auxiliary Cadre, want to find out what the best units are for running Aux Cadre, this is the video for you. So we're going to start out with the Firesight Marksman. So I think personally the Firesight Marksman is a little overhyped. I think that he does do a good job as far as like providing a lone op aura to other Tau units, which maybe buffs him a little bit, specifically in Aux Cadre. He also has the marker like keyword, and so he can guide in a pinch, which I think is really great. But and he can hold enhancements, so he can be a good place to put the admired leader enhancement. So I think if you're taking a Firesight Marksman, you're taking one of them and you're putting the admired leader enhancement on him to give out in your command phase uh, a unit, a Kroot or Vespid unit within 12 inches. He gives them +1 leadership and +1 OC, which I personally think is an auto take enhancement. Is kind of how Aux Cadre runs. So for that reason, I'm gonna slot him into the top end of B tier. Now I think he has some value, but there's a lot of competition around that 70 points, or excuse me, around that 70 point mark for units that guide. So for only 10 more points, you're getting a unit of stealth suits that's going to be giving your whole army reroll 1s to hit and reroll 1s to wound against a specific target, or pathfinders who are buffed really heavily in this detachment, I think, because they now get the benefit of being a guided unit. That benefit, so +1 ballistic skill and ignores cover when they target the unit that they're spotting, which combos really nicely with having Kroot or Vespid within 6 inches and getting the extra AP. Now that unit all of a sudden turns into a unit that can credibly kill and skirmish with 5-man marine equivalent units, so units with 2 wounds and a 3-up save that are toughness 4. So for that reason, I'm going to slot him into B tier, but I do think that there is a very real world where running the admired leader enhancement specifically on him is really good. Next, we're going to we've got Vespid. So Vespid are really strong in Auxiliary Cadre for obvious reasons. I don't think that they're very much of a damage piece. Now they can chip in when need be, which is pretty cool, but you're not going to be using strats on them other than the auto advance 6 in my opinion. So what I like to do is I like to create a little pocket that's within 18 inches of your opponent's natural expansion, have a Tau Empire unit giving them the 18-inch lone op, so being wholly within 6 of a Tau Empire unit, but 18 inches away from your opponent's natural expansion. And if they don't set up an Overwatch, or they don't have more than 10 OC on that objective, I'll spend 1 CP, auto advance 6, and put 10 OC on their natural expansion, and steal their primary, basically for free. So that's where the combo with the admired leader enhancement comes into play, is with the Vespid specifically bumping them up to OC2. So I think they're really great. They're great for pushing out rapids because they fly. I think they're an auto take in this detachment. I think you take at least 2 of them if not 3, because they just have so much utility. Being able to give out the extra AP buff when they get close to your opponent, which is really easy to do because they move so fast. They have assault on their guns, so again they can kind of chip in throughout the course of the game as well. So I'm going to put them straight up into S tier. I think that they're an auto take unit, and you'll see them in pretty much every detachment. So if you're a newer player, I highly suggest you at least pick up one box. You have 2 units of 5, which is I think a very comfortable place to start as far as Vespid are concerned. Next, we've got Darkstrider. I think Darkstrider is all around a solid utility piece in any Tau army. Right now, you're seeing a little bit more 6-inch deep strike back in the game with things like Death Guard Terminators, the I forget the name of them, but the guys with Death Shrouds, the Death Shroud Terminators that now deep strike within 6 inches. I think people have gotten comfortable in the meta with not taking things like infiltrators. So because of the change from 3-inch to 6-inch deep strike, I think there was a little bit of a lull where people thought, okay, the 12-inch no-go zones are not as impactful as they used to be, which is causing people to now run a lot more 6-inch deep strikes because they're not seeing many folks actually take the 12-inch deep strike denial. So I think Darkstrider has some viability in any tile list right now as far as utility is concerned. If you just want to have a 60-point unit sit on your home field on the back and um, you know provide a no-go zone, I think that's a really viable strategy here. For Aux Cadre specifically, I don't know how necessary it is because you're going to want to run a lot of bodies. Usually you're going to have at least 40 infantry on the table at the beginning of the game, so there's not as much of a need. So for that reason, I'm going to toss him into B tier. Still a solid pick. I don't think you can really go wrong. Next, we have the Trail Shaper. Now, the Trail Shaper has a really interesting ability. He does 2 things. He gives you one, a redeploy for Kroot infantry units. So where this really combos well is with the Kroot Farstalker unit. Now, the Kroot Farstalker unit is 12 models, which means that if you go first to deploy your army, and you are able to infiltrate them, you can essentially just infiltrate them across the entire table, knowing that with the Trail Shaper redeploy, you can then redeploy them into a safer area once before you know who's going first or second. Or you can keep them there if you really want to and jail your opponent. So it's a really strong ability. I personally don't love investing into Kroot carnivore units, but as far as utility is concerned, I think it's a really strong utility piece that you can use to redeploy units. I really wish you were able to use this on rampagers, for example, so you could redeploy them and stage them more aggressively. But I think the Trail Traper is solid. He also gives his unit a reactive move, which is pretty cute. So I think he's worth playing around with, but I think investing into Kroot characters just as a principle is not something I personally do. I like to have my Ox units really cheap and lean and not to invest a ton in them because at the end of the day, the detachment rule here that we are going to be leveraging the most is going to be the extra AP for our Tau Empire units by getting our Kroot nice and close, and when they get nice and close, they do not last very long. So I think he's a little bit more valuable than Darkstrider personally, just because you don't with Darkstrider you don't really need that 12-inch with the other units that you have in the army who can just screen that 6-inch pretty fairly easily when it does come up. Next is going to be the Flesh Shaper. So the Flesh Shaper gives his unit a 6-up Feel No Pain, and I believe it's sustained hits 1. Kind of like I was saying earlier, I don't really love investing into the Kroot units because they rarely are going to hit your opponent first, and your opponent is likely going to just kill them super easily. Outside of the 18-inch level up, there's really no defensive buffs here. They just have stealth and a 6-up save. So for that reason, I think that 45 points could be going into. I would really just rather have another Ox unit like Kroot Hounds, for example, that can go out and give extra AP to the rest of my army. So I'm going to put him in C tier. Piranhas, I think they're really solid in any army right now. They take the extra AP really well with getting those Seeker missiles up to AP4 and that Fusion Blaster up to AP5. I think you can't really go wrong as far as like a solid damage dealing unit is concerned. Now, this isn't a unit that I would particularly use any strats on, like the +2 strength. I could see using interlocking maneuvers on a big unit of these guys, if you're running 2 or 3, let's say. But I think it's a solid unit. I don't know. I haven't tested them out in Aux Cadre, but I think they slot in pretty well as like a B tier unit. I would probably take them over a Fireside Marksman, for example. Next, we've got the Hammerhead. I think the Hammerhead is really good in Aux Cadre for a couple reasons. I think it takes and leverages the stratagems that Aux Cadre has pretty well. So two of them being the +2 strength, which gets the ion cannon on the Hammerhead up from strength 8 to strength 10, which is an important break point for Tau because we have a lot of strength 8 shooting, Riptides, for example, Ghostkeels. So being able to bump one of those units up to strength 10, like the Ion Hammerhead, is really great. And why the Ion Hammerhead is probably the best unit to do this on is because it's getting the +1 to hit when it shoots against monsters and vehicles, which stacks with the +1 ballistic skill from the being guided, which they likely will be. So they'll be hitting on 2s, and with the stealth suit bonus, we'll be reeling 1s to hit. So it turns it into a very efficient damage piece into those light vehicles T9, T10. It also does exceptionally well into elite infantry, taking that extra AP bonus and going from AP2 to AP3, which really helps Tau a ton. So I think that the Ion Hammerhead and the Hammerhead in general is just quite strong in Aux Cadre. Having a fast-moving vehicle that you're not super worried about getting tagged because you have access to interlocking maneuvers, so you can move at the end of the fight phase if your opponent tags you in combat, which is effectively a fallback and shoot. I think is really strong, and honestly, I slot it right up into S tier. Next, the Skyray. The Skyray also takes a lot of these buffs super well. I think that, as far as my personal playstyle, I am favoring Ion Hammerheads over the Skyrays these days, but with the inclusion of things like the Plague Drones from Death Guard, which we're seeing a lot of, in combination with the Skyray's ability to reroll all hit rolls, I think it's an interesting choice right now. I don't think Aux Cadre particularly buffs it super strongly. I mean, other than the extra AP, which is nice, of course, getting it to AP4. I personally favor the Ion Hammerheads, but that being said, I don't think you can really go wrong with the Skyray right now, given where we're at in the meta. You're seeing a lot of Demon Princes, which fly, and just lots of fly all over the game. It's a very common keyword, so I think if in your particular meta you're seeing more Death Guard, you're seeing a lot more um, tanks out there, and you want to have that wounding on threes capability of the strength 14 coming from the Skyrays, I would suggest trying them out, and I think that they're an A tier unit in Aux Cadre. Next, we've got the Sunshark Bomber. I haven't looked at the Sunshark Bomber a ton. I think its ability, if I remember correctly, is it does grenades when it flies over something. I don't think it takes very many of the buffs super well from Aux Cadre. We're basically going to just skip right over this one. I wouldn't consider taking the Sunshark Bomber. There are other flyers that I would consider taking, but the Sunshark Bomber is probably the last one. For that reason, I think it wouldn't really benefit you to put it in your list, so I'm going to put it in D tier. Next, we've got the Ghostkeel. I think the Ghostkeel got a lot better with the recent buffs to Tau. The reason being is because the Ghostkeel is typically the 4th or 5th best damage dealer in your army. You're typically running maybe a couple crisis teams, let's say a unit of broadsides, a hammerhead. So you could see before the buffs, you had 3 stealth suit guides. So the 3 stealth suit guides would first go to the Sunforge, they first go to the broadsides, they first go to the hammerhead. And typically either the Ghostkeel would be a unit that would guide in a pinch if you were running out of guide units, or it would just get a vanilla guide of like a Pathfinder guide or something like that. So it would just be the on threes. Well, now with the changes, it's much more likely that Ghostkeel are going to get that reroll 1s to hit, reroll 1s to wound, which is really strong in helping buff their damage. So I think that just outside of Aux Cadre even, they're a really strong unit. Now, when you look at some of the buffs that you can give them in Aux Cadre, the extra AP, similar to Ion Hammerheads, gets them to Strength 8 AP3 for 3. They also have the option to take Fusion Colliders, so the big Meltagun that's 18-inch range, it's Strength 12 AP4. You can get that to AP5 with the buffs in Aux Cadre, so I think that's a really strong breakpoint for Tau, shooting into marine vehicles and not giving them a save. and the fact that they also give out a lone op aura to auxiliary units, I think it makes it a really strong unit in Aux Cadre specifically. So if you have a couple of these guys, I highly recommend testing them out in auxiliary cadre. I think you can take 2, even 3 if you really wanted to, and really double down on the Ghostkeel in this detachment. I think, me personally, I don't feel the need to have to take lone ops, but if you're going to take lone ops in Aux Cadre, this is the first one I would take, and I highly recommend trying him out. So I'm going to put him straight into S tier. I think he's one of the best units that you can take in Aux Cadre, period. These two, the drone ports and the tide wall, I really couldn't tell you what they do. I'll be 100% honest with you. I've had some folks tell me that the tide wall got a little bit better. If I remember correctly, they have like a bunch of drone shots that hit on fives. I do think it is kind of cute to be able to move these units at the end of the fight phase, and then move them again in your turn, and like dump something like breachers out. But they have just such a large footprint, and they're so awkward to move that it can be kind of difficult to get a ton of value out of them. Personally, I just prefer the devilfish. Being able to advance the devilfish and get guys out of it is just such a strong ability, and the fact that it moves 12, I think, just makes it the auto take transport in the tower range. So for that reason, I'm just gonna slot these guys underneath the Sun Shark. I probably would take the Sun Shark, to be honest, over these two units. Next, we've got the Kroot Rampagers. So I think the Kroot Rampagers are extremely good for Tau. I think they're almost worth taking in other detachments, even outside of Kroot Hunting Pack. I would try them in Maka, for example, and the reason being is Tau kind of has an issue with killing units in the early game and essentially skirmishing early on, right, without committing um, damage dealers to specific areas of the table. Now, the reason for that is, right, we're a shooting army mainly, so to shoot units behind a wall, we have to get behind the wall essentially to shoot them. Whereas Rampagers, now, as opposed to your opponent getting to stage behind a wall really aggressively. You put stuff on objectives. They get to commit the minimum into you to kill them. Now you have a really interesting unit that can set up as like a heroic threat behind a Kroot unit that's standing on an objective. Now your opponent can't really send those 5 jump back intercessors or the 5 corn berserkers to kill that 10-man Kroot unit, because if you heroic the rampagers, they're likely not going to win that fight. The corn berserkers, so I think there are a lot of things that you can do with Rampagers here. They combo really well with Ghostkeels, right? Just sitting Rampagers within a 6-inch aura of a Ghostkeel. You could even put a 6-man there and heroicing them. They take there's an auto advance 6 inches stratagem in this detachment. There is an advance and charge stratagem in this detachment. So one thing this detachment specifically is CP hungry, so you're going to find a lot of opportunities where you're going to say to yourself, wow, I would really love to give this unit advanced charge, or I would really love to give this unit +2 strength. And it'll happen multiple times per round. So what I like to do is I will take speculative advances with Rampager units. I'll just roll advances on a couple of them. If I hit a 6, then I'll spend the advanced charge when I have like a reasonable charge right in front of me. So long story short, I think they're fantastic. The change from knights being toughness 12 to toughness 11 really helps them out, because they're doing mortals on the charge, which is really just damage that's agnostic to the toughness of their target, and the fact that they have access to reroll wounds makes them a really strong unit. Because wounding on 5s rerolling is just good enough to chip in significant damage anywhere. So in Aux Cadre, I'd say you want at least 9 of these guys, and there's a world where you run 12, 15, 18 as well. So highly recommend picking these models up. They look really cool, and they're a ton of fun to play with on the tabletop, and I'm going to move them straight up to S tier. I think they are one of the best units you can take in Aux Cadre, period. Next, we have the Lone Spear. So I recently tested out the Lone Spear. I think the Lone Spear is decent in Aux Cadre. His ability is really helpful on the 6-man Rampager units, and what he does is when you hit a unit, when you're shooting and you hit a unit, you give up reroll hits to all your auxiliary units, which is really nice. Now, there are a couple issues with that. One, the gun that you're going to take is a D6 blast gun. So into an ideal target, let's say, or there are two ideal targets, I guess, for this type of buff. It would be like a large 20-man unit that your opponent has, where you want to just get as much damage into them as possible for the rampagers. So think a 20-man Corn Berserker blob, for example. You're likely going to hit that target, give out the full rerolls, and the rampagers um, are really good into those types of targets in addition to tough stuff. Now, the issue comes with going into the tough stuff, right, is when you have a D6 shot count and you need to hit on a 4-up, right, there's just it's a non-zero chance that you just roll one or two shots and you don't roll a 4-up. And that happened to me a couple times when I was playing this unit in an RTT. So I would suggest, I think this unit is best when you're also running Kroot Riders, who are going to be shooting as well, so giving out the rerolls to the shooting unit, because when you are likely only going to have a couple points in the game if you have just Rampagers, where this buff, the reroll hits buff, is going to be useful. So I think that if you're running a combination of both, you're going to want to include him. I think he's decent, but for 80 points feels a little steep for what you get out of him right now, because you kind of have to invest around the Lone Spear to get a ton of value. So for that reason, I'm going to put him into the top of B tier. I think he's a good unit, but it depends on how you've built your list. I don't think he goes into a list that just has 9 Rampagers or even 12. I think you're going to be leaning heavily into Aux units to have a reason to take him. Next, we've got the Warshaper. I think he's a little better than the Fleshaper because he gives out that free strat to his unit. There are some things you can do with that, right? Which is auto advance 6. You can give his unit reroll wounds. You can give his unit extra AP. All solid buffs, but again, you kind of run into the issue where you are now investing into a 65-point unit that really isn't meant to do damage, and you're kind of forcing it into that role, in my opinion. So I personally wouldn't invest into the Warshaper. I think he's a decent enough character, but I personally would not take him, and I don't think he's particularly a competitive pick in Aux Cadre specifically. Next, we've got the Kroot Farstalkers. Now, this is kind of a tough one for me because I can see the value of the Farstalkers. I think they're a solid unit. You get um, 12 models in the unit, which is pretty important for an infiltrating unit because in No Man's Land it actually stretches out enough where you can basically cover the entirety of No Man's Land, where your opponent then cannot infiltrate in No Man's Land alongside you. They get a lot better when there's a Trail Shaper included in that unit, so that way you can redeploy them into a safe spot after you infiltrate and aggressively screen out the midboard so your opponent cannot infiltrate there. I personally don't take them on my list. I favor Pathfinders for an extra 5 points as an infiltrating unit who already get a pseudo redeploy in the fact that they scout 7 built in. So you can still infiltrate and screen out a pretty significant portion of the table where you don't want your opponent to be. But then instead of redeploying, you essentially are just scouting 7, which in and of itself is a redeploy. So it's a little bit more telegraphed. I would say it's a little less risky to run the Pathfinder unit. I think it's more risky to run the Trail Shaper unit because they don't have that scout move if you aren't running the Trail Shapers. So for that reason, I think they're a decent pick. Like I think they can be a competitive unit. They hold the buffs pretty well of Aux Cadre. Again, just having like a large screen is helpful. But personally, I would just invest the extra 5 points, get a unit of Pathfinders, and go from there. So I'm gonna put it right ahead of the Trail Shaper as far as utility is concerned. Like having the ability to just screen the entire table is really strong, but it's not something you're gonna have the ability to bank on every single turn, or excuse me, every single game. Next, we've got the Tiger Shark. So I think the Tiger Shark's an interesting pick in Aux Cadre. Now, it holds the buffs of Aux Cadre really, really well, right? Having +2 strength on all of its weapons is kind of bananas. I think the extra AP is obviously really, really good also. It just has so many shots. It has 6 Seeker missiles, 2 ion cannons, it has a cyclic. I know I'm forgetting some other guns, but it has 2 blast shots that are d6 plus 1 each. I believe it's 611. It just pumps out a ton of bullets, so plus 2 strength on all of that, extra AP on all of that, really, really good. It also benefited a ton from the changes to Tau with the now you can split fire and still get benefits if those units are guided. So you can shoot your ion cannon at one unit, you can shoot the Six Seekers at another unit. Now the downside is the same downside that the Tiger Shark has always had, which is, for those who don't know, the Tiger Shark's base is over 6 inches. So what that means is there's actually an FAQ in the app. You gotta like dig to find it. But essentially what it means is it has to sit on the table for a turn before it can activate in the game. Um, which is really tough, right? Because what you want to do with this massive unit is place him down and immediately shoot him so you can get value out of him. But what ends up happening is you do one of two things. Either you rapid ingress him in your opponent's turn, or you deploy him in your turn and he has to fly around the table and basically give your opponent an opportunity to shoot the unit, which is really easy to do because flyers operate with true line of sight, meaning that they're not protected by ruins. If your opponent can see it and has range, it can shoot it, and vice versa, right? It's really strong because you can do the same to your opponent. That all being said, it's a really significant drawback because that means essentially 50% of the time, because when your opponent goes first, you'll be able to rapid ingress him in your opponent's turn 2, the beginning of turn 2. You can then activate him in your turn 2. But if you go first, you won't be able to rapid ingress him until your opponent's turn. It won't be available on the table till your turn 3. So, long story short, it's not super efficient, but it takes the buff super, super well. I think you could be successful with the Tiger Shark. It's just not my preferred playstyle, but I think it's an A tier unit in Aux Cadre. I think it takes the buffs really well, and I think it does a ridiculous amount of damage and really benefited from the changes to the to Tau and guiding in the last balanced data slate. Next, we've got Breachers. So I've got kind of a hot take here. I don't love Breachers in Aux Cadre. Now, I know that they get up to strength. They can get up to strength 8 with the plus 2 strength, um, plus 2 strength stratagem. They get the extra AP in Aux Cadre, which is really nice. But I find that the reason I don't love them is because they do what my auxiliary units are already doing to a degree. They're doing one of those two jobs that the auxiliary units are doing, which is denying primary. So in order for me to get the buffs from to give the breachers an extra AP, I'm both committing the breacher unit and an Aux Cadre unit at the same time, which to me runs counter to how I like to play Aux Cadre, which is I commit an Aux unit, don't let my opponent move forward, and I shoot them at range with an Ion Hammer. And that means that unless my opponent has a ton of shooting as well, I'm probably going to get to activate that Ion Hammer again. I'm probably going to get to activate the Ion Hammer a third time even, and all the while I'm also denying my opponent's primary with an Aux unit and screening them. So it's just a very natural play pattern where you're aggressively screening with Aux units, you're giving out the extra AP, your Tau units get to shoot, you rinse and repeat. Whereas the Breacher unit, you're committing them, they would be doing the same job that Aux unit is doing, which is hopping on your opponent's natural and denying primary. So for that reason, I find it to be inefficient. I also find the plus 2 strength to not be very impactful in them. There aren't many breakpoints where it matters. Because of the strength 6, you're already wounding tough like T11 stuff on 5, so getting to strength 7 or 8 allows you to wound T12 stuff on 5s and also T6 stuff on 3s. So and T4 on 2. So there's 3 breakpoints there, which I would say aren't super common and aren't super impactful for Tau. Like we already have a good suite of elite killing power in Ion Hammerheads, Ghostkeels, whatnot. So I am actually going to slot these guys into B tier. I think they're solid. Like they fit a decent role within Tau, but I don't think they get a ton better in Aux Cadre as much as they do like Monka, where you're not taking as many Aux units. You need something to go out deny primary, and then you also get the lethals, right? Or Kalyan, same thing. You need something to go deny primary, they also get sustained hits. Or experimental prototype cadre, where again it's a dynamic piece that goes denies your opponent's primary and receives the buffs extremely well. So I think for that reason, breachers for me are they slot right into B tier. Now, Cadre Fireblade, again, I think kind of goes along with breachers. Like I'm not if I'm taking breachers, I don't think I'm investing a Cadre Fireblade in them in Aux Cadre. I'm probably just using them as a cheap throwaway unit that does some damage on its way in. Cold Star Commander, I think you want to take at least one unit of Crisis Suits in Aux Cadre. So I think the Cold Star Commander, we're going to call him Cold Star or Enforcer, I think it's pretty good here. The Crisis Suits really like the buffs in Aux Cadre. The +2 strength gets them from strength 7 to strength 9, with all those shots that are going to be AP2 damage to. Again, I've had many occasions where I need to kill a 20-man Corn Berserker unit that's going to blood surge into my face, and having this Fire Knife unit, being able to give it the +2 strength, so it's the commander's hitting on 2s, rerolling 1s, then it's wounding on 2s, rerolling 1s at AP2, ignore cover, is just such a nice unit to have. And it's just been money in the bank over and over again. So for that reason, I'm going to put it into A tier. I think if you aren't running 6-man Rampager units, which both double as both a great unit to kill your opponent's tough stuff with a CP investment. They also do really well into like hordes because of the volume of attacks at damage 2, the sustained hits, the lance. If you don't have that piece, I think you have to have a fire knife unit with the commander in it just to be able to deal with hordes when they pop up. There's a few different units in the game where you really want to one-shot them. There's a GSC unit. It's called where they can put an enhancement. Basically, when they drop down, they get crit 5s, lethal and sustained 5s. And then if you shoot that unit, this is in the Host of Ascension detachment. If you shoot that unit, you don't kill it, they get to pick it back up. So that means they're going to get to drop it back down, get crit 5s, and so it's a nasty cycle. Same thing with, there are the pink horrors. If you don't kill the whole unit, they split. So again, there's just a lot of units in the game where once when I have this unit, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is it's freaking amazing. Um, Devilfish, I think it's a solid unit here. Took the buffs really well. We're just gonna put it right into B tier. Not much to be said. Like you're only gonna be taking them if you're taking breachers, but you're not mad about it, right? Like being able to split off seeker missiles, it's just a good transport. Ethereal, I think the Ethereal is decent in Aux Cadre. You can put Admired Leader on him, the enhancement to give out the +1 OC and +1 leadership. He gives you CP on a 4-up, which is really good in this attachment because um, you want to use so many strats. So I think he's a solid unit. I think it's a competitive pick, and I don't think you're going to feel bad taking him. So um, I think he's going to go slot right into the top of B tier. It's frustrating when you don't get CP on a 4 plus. I find that I have a tough time fitting him into my list, but if you prioritize it, I don't think there's a reason you can't feel pretty good about putting him in there. He also did get the marker light keyword recently, so now he can guide in a pinch and give out ignores cover, which is pretty nice actually. Farsight, I think he's pretty good in here. I still personally prefer other commanders over Farsight, but I think Farsight is more competitive in Aux Cadre because there's a lot of buffs that he can give his unit. Like the way I think about Farsight's unit is it is always going to have either access to falling back at the end of the fight phase and interlocking maneuvers. If I haven't used that stratagem because he has that -1 CP aura, or he's always going to have +2 strength if I haven't used that elsewhere. So I find that I think he's a really strong unit. He can also get assault in this detachment, so he's gonna basically have one of those 3 buffs every turn. He can rapid ingress for free. So I think for that reason, I might actually slot him a little bit higher than the Cold Star here. I think for the price point, It's arguable. I personally haven't had a ton of luck with him. You know what? I'll stick to my guns. I think having the extra 2 guns on the Cold Star Enforcer is probably just straight up better after doing the math. But I don't think you can really go wrong. Like I said, it's a CP hungry detachment. You can put him with really any unit that you want to. You can put him with Fire Knives. You can put him with Starsight or Sunforge. They all receive the buffs really well. And with Farsight giving out +2 strength, with him giving them +1 to wound, I think they do pretty dang well. So I would consider him a competitive pick for sure in Aux Cadre. Next, we've got the Pathfinders. I think Pathfinders are going to be top of A for me. I don't think they're particularly S tier. They are a very strong unit within the Tau range, especially in Aux Cadre now. Kind of like we talked earlier, they get the extra AP. They now guide themselves. They can pop out and reliably do damage. There's an argument for taking even more than one unit here, but one is certainly auto take all the time. So again, if you're a newer Tau player out there, you should have at least one unit of these guys in your army. I think they're just too good not to run with. And I believe I have the same picture here for breachers, but this is a Pathfinder unit, okay, for all intents and purposes, and I think it is better than this guy right here. Next, we've got the Kroot Carnivores. So you're going to be running at least one of these units. I personally like to. I've tried just one in the past, but again, they're going to just slot up right into the top. I think they're essentially an auto take in. Not essentially. They're an auto take in Aux Cadre. I personally like having 20 of them. The first unit is typically a unit that goes out and contests the middle, or they screen my opponent aggressively, give out buffs to my damage dealers. The second unit will stay on my home, wait till the end of the game, provide a screen. Typically, I find my opponent will like push me late to try and contest my home. So just having a 10-man unit that I can auto advance 6 and just say, stay away from me for another turn or two is just really helpful late in the game. Or just step onto an objective with 30 OC with the Admired Leader buff. Just really helps do what Aux Cadre wants to do, which is keep your opponent at arm's length, make sure they're not scoring points on primary while your guns activate over and over again. Kroot Hounds, I like Kroot Hounds in this for obvious reasons. If you're taking one of the characters, like a Trail Shaper, War Shaper, etc., they get a little bit better because they have another way to get OC. I think if you're in a pinch and you're trying to fit in like a Cold Star Commander versus an Enforcer Commander, there's a world where you drop like a Vespid unit to a Kroot Hound unit because of that 25 points that you can save there, because you're typically going to be using that first Vespid unit anyways to just screen aggressively, do some sort of a secondary, and as long as you have access to OC, like with the Admired Leader enhancement, you can give them to Kroot Hounds to make them OC1, or with a crew character nearby, like a Lone Spear, Trail Shaper, etc., then they can go out and do actions for you, which is really nice, and score points. So I think they're a solid unit. I'm gonna put them up in. I think they're better than an Ethereal, and you're more likely to take them in these lists. Now, Kroot Riders. So I think this is a pretty interesting one. I haven't experimented with Kroot Riders a ton in Aux Cadre, I'll be perfectly honest. But folks that I trust within the Tau community really like this unit in combination with things like Ghostkeels, in combination with things like the Lone Spear, just having like little mobile shooting units within Lone Op auras that can then skirmish pretty early on for midfield objectives. So just imagine you're infiltrating a Ghostkeel unit, and then you have 2 or 3 Kroot Riders scouting into that 6-inch aura that gives them the 18-inch Lone Op, and you have this little firing base of Ghostkeel and Kroot Riders that your opponent can't really interact with unless it just shoves a bunch of stuff that's capable of killing a Ghostkeel right at it. So I think it's a solid unit. I don't know how competitive a pick it is just from my own personal experience, but I trust the people around me who've used it before. So I'm going to slot it right up here underneath the Kroot Carnivores. I think it's a solid pick based on what I know, and something I'm going to start testing a little bit that I definitely need to test is the Kroot Rider Ghostkeel combo. Next, we've got the Missile Broadsides. So I think the Missile Broadsides and the Rail Broadsides are both cool picks in Aux Cadre. We'll start with the Rail Broadside first. I think the Rail Broadside is really, really good in Aux Cadre. that's because the breakpoint of AP4 to AP5 is pretty gnarly, specifically for dealing with units without invulns, or yes, without invulns, and having the ability to pop a dev wound or two through can really help with the reliability of the unit. They take the extra AP extremely well, and being able to fall back and shoot essentially with interlocking maneuvers, just really, really good with these guys, as well as the assault. So in a pinch, you can get them an extra d6 inches of movement, so they can move a little bit more aggressively. But yeah, I think they're very good in here, and I would personally slot them. I think you probably want to take at least one unit of two. I would personally slot them up here in A tier as well. Next, we got the missile broadsides. Again, I think for me personally, I haven't used them a ton. The reason being is I find them to be redundant with the fire knife unit that I like to run. They do have the 12 shots at strength 7 AP2 for 2. I did test this unit out before bringing to Aux Cadre to a team tournament 3 or 4 months ago. I thought it was fine. I didn't think it was better. I actually ended up opting for the second unit of rail broadsides personally, but I don't think you can really go wrong either way where you put these points. But I think it is a little more optimal to run the rail broadsides over the missile broadside. So for that reason, I'm just going to slot it right underneath. I'm going to put it right underneath the Kroot riders. I think you probably want to run Kroot riders more. Awesome. I already have a piranha in here, so this guy doesn't exist. Just pretend that didn't happen. Um, Now the Razor Shark. Um, Now I took two Razor Sharks to a 220 player Super Major. Went 5-1 with them. I think they're really strong, but highly terrain dependent. So, for example, the local meta that I play, they have this, and this interacts with like how flyers interpret line of sight. So, kind of like I was describing with the Tiger Shark, the Razor Sharks have true line of sight, meaning they basically ignore um, like the little squares on the bottom of those, the footprints, when it comes to line of sight. So they do a really good job of like shooting transports behind walls or shooting space marines that are hiding behind walls that you normally wouldn't be able to interact with. But again, it all depends on like how big those walls physically are. So that tournament that I went to, the Rocky Mountain Open, the terrain walls were very, very small, so there wasn't actually a great place for my opponent to hide, meaning that I could drop them in and activate basically at will, which was extremely strong. But my local tournament scene, for example, has these giant elves. They're massive, where you can like hide like half an army behind them, and it's basically impossible to actually get line of sight with one of these planes because they're just so big and they cover such a large footprint. So I would say very terrain dependent, but I think it's a solid choice in Aux Cadre. They take the extra AP well, they take the +2 strength well, and I think just overall solid unit. They are a little expensive for the points, and um, they don't have any OC, so taking 340 points of guns without OC, which is what I was doing, is a little spooky because they're not really scoring any points to you. They're just for you. They're just there to kill. So for that reason, I'm going to put them top of the B tier. I think they're a perfectly serviceable unit, worth trying out, but it really depends on the scenario of the tournament you're going to, whether or not they're actually going to be solid. All right. Next, we've got the Riptide. So I personally am not a huge fan of the Riptide and Auxiliary Cadre. I don't think it's a bad pick. It's just not the pick that I like to make. Um, the reason being is just the way that I built my list. I usually like to have like 7 or 8 Aux units, and so if I'm running, let's say, like 2 Riptides over 2 Hammerheads, those 2 Riptides are going to cost me an extra 90 points. I would personally rather invest in like, getting another rail broadside or getting another Pathfinder team as opposed to having the benefit of the 2 Riptides over the 2 Hammerheads. So I don't think it's a bad pick by any means. It's just not my personal favorite pick in Aux Cadre. Um, I would slot them right above the Razor Sharks. I'm sure some people are going to disagree with me, and that's totally okay. But I personally haven't had a ton of success with them. Next, you got the Fire Knife team. The Fire Knife team is super great in Aux Cadre. I think that they are essentially one of the better. Um, they're one of the better crisis suits that you can take in here. I personally am going to put them. They have to go up against the missile broadsides. I'm going to put them in A tier as well. I think they're a really competitive pick in Aux Cadre because they're going from strength 7 AP1 to strength 7 AP2. You can get them to strength 8 or strength 9 really easily, and they really love to be able to fall back and shoot, not get tagged. Just a very strong unit. It's been a staple for me in my tournament list. Is the Fire Knife team with a Cold Star or Enforcer Commander. Next, we're going to go with the Sunforge team. Again, take the buffs really well. In Aux Cadre, I personally prefer things like rail broadsides over a Sunforge team for my anti-tank. Now, the reason being is the reason being is I think committing the Sunforge team requires you to get really up close and personal with your opponent. Now, that means that if you're committing an Aux unit as well at the same time, it doesn't really matter how if you're move blocking them, for example, because you're going to be so close to your opponent, they're just going to be able to charge right after they kill the move block anyways. So I don't think they are repeatable value because you have to get so close with them. That's why I prefer rail broadsides where you can get repeatable value, right? If you kill the gun that's on, that your opponent has line of sight with the rail broadsides, then you can, give them assault, move them further up the table, and they're not in danger of really getting charged or something like that. So that all being said, though, they do take the buffs really well. They're a really good unit for killing super tough stuff because they can go from strength 9 to strength 11 with the Strat and Aux Cadre. So I know people are a fan of it. I personally am not, but I think it is a competitive pick for sure in Aux Cadre. It's nice to have the interlocking maneuver strat so they can fall back if your opponent tags you and swings down on you. You can then move them, go further into your opponent's lines, and do some pretty serious damage. So I think they're really good with Farsight as well, because then it's a whole unit that all has a 4-up invuln. So I'm going to slot them also into A tier. Personally, I'm going to put them right below the Fire Knives, but I think it's a great pick in Aux Cadre, just not one that I prefer personally. Star Scythes, also pretty solid in Aux Cadre. They get up to AP2 pretty easily. I'll be honest, I haven't run this unit a ton in Aux Cadre because I favor things like the the Fire Knife unit and the Rampagers as my anti-infantry clearing and Ion Hammerheads. So I don't see them as being a ton more valuable than those two units. Plus you have the Ghostkeel, so it's just a lot of anti-elite killing power. For that reason alone, I think they're probably the fourth best pick in that bracket of units. I'm gonna put them right around the I think we could even put them into B tier here. Like I think you can be successful with them, but I don't think I think they're a better picks as far as like anti-infantry, anti-elite killing power is concerned. Next we've got Shadow Sun. Shadow Sun previous to the buffs was a staple in my list. I do think that she gives out some really relevant buffs. She has the real ones that hit aura. She's a lone op, so you can stage Aux units near her, as well as having the 5-up on a CP bonus that she gives out. Now, it took me like 6 months to always remember to use this little buff of hers to get CP back. But once I did remember to do it, I found myself rolling like at least 3. I would spend like 3 CP near her per game, and I was averaging getting like a CP per game out of her, which isn't nothing. Getting another strat in Aux Cadre to use is really great. I personally still like her a lot. I think there are situations where you're going to really need that real one-stit aura. It's not as relevant as it used to be, so I think she dropped a little bit in value, but I think just having a lone op with that real one-stit aura, she's got 2 melt guns that are strength 10 that can go to AP5. She chips in some significant damage, and she usually gets you like a CP back a game if you remember it. To me, means she's pretty damn good in this. So I personally rate her pretty highly. I'm gonna put her up into A tier, right around this Fire Knife. We'll put her ahead of the Sunforge. This is just, again, my personal opinion. Stealth suits, we don't have to talk about them very much. They're going into S tier. I think that they are, probably the best unit in the book right now. Um, if you don't own 3 already, uh, buy buy 3 units of them. Being able to give out real one's hit, real one's wound, and ignores cover for your entire army against 3 units is just so good. Uh, I always I found myself not really needing lone ops as much because I have them. Because what I can do is like poke one dude's gun around a corner, around a ruin wall, let's say, and have one have him see like one Krootox Rampager unit, then string the rest of the stealth suit unit into a corner of the wall. Basically, you can just get a ton of value out of that 18-inch lone op aura, because all you have to do is have line of sight, and then you can stage the unit wholly within 6 of the stealth suit unit. You don't even have to be within 6 of the guy that can see you. You can be within 6 of the rest of the unit. So you can string them out behind a ruin. As long as you can see the Rampager unit, for example, you can like stage pretty damn aggressively without your opponent being able to interact with the stealth suit. So um, I find it to be super helpful in a pinch, but yeah, they're the best unit in the book. You should have 3 units of them if you don't already. Next, we've got the Storm Surge. Now, I sadly found out recently that you can't use, or you don't get the buffs from the Storm Surge for the extra AP in Aux Cadre. It's actually locked for Titanic units, so anything that's Titanic can't get benefits from the extra AP. So for that reason, I am going to put him in C tier. Like, he does receive some of the buffs well, but I think for 400 points, you could just take like 3 Ion Hammerheads, and me personally, I just way rather have 3 Ion Hammerheads than the Storm Surge. He does take the +2 strength buff pretty well, but again, give me 3 Ion Hammerheads. Townar, same thing. Doesn't get the bonus of Aux Cadre. You can still use the +2 strength. He's probably a little worse than the Storm Surge, but I think all in all is like, if you're trying to have a fun game of Warhammer, that's probably where I'd start. Now, just taking a look at this tier list, I think we're a little top heavy in A and B tier, so I think we're gonna put the Trail Shaper at the top of C. Um, what else do we got here? I like where the rest of this is at. Piranha's decent. Yeah, I think I'm pretty happy with the rest of this tier list from this point. So, folks, if you play Aux Cadre, would love to hear your thoughts down below on what you think of this tier list. What did I get right? What did I get wrong? Always great hearing your comments and your opinions. So, let me know what you think. But if you made it to the end, greatly appreciate it. Thanks for sticking to the end of this video. I release weekly Tau content, so if you're new here and you want to see more of this type of stuff, more tier lists, more tactics videos, just talking about Tau as it changed throughout the meta, hit that subscribe button. But until next week, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.